The Roundhouse is an incredible, iconic building of North London. It's actually built in 1846 as an engine maintenance shed, one of the first and the best surviving in the country. It was new technology of the day, and I've got a plan in my office from 1854, only 8 years later, showing the conversion of the Roundhouse from a steam engine shed into a bonded warehouse for wines, gins and spirits. So the reason why it survives today is really because it was a warehouse. But thankfully, Arnold Wesker, the playwright, now Sir Arnold Wesker, got hold of the end of a lease of the building in the early 60s and turned it into something called Centre 42. And the first event that actually happened here was on the 15th of October 1966, when a young local band performed, and it was their first major gig, and they were called Pink Floyd. It was freezing cold, it was rat infested, it was disgustingly dirty. It was probably an awful experience, but things got slightly better. But when I first arrived here in 1999, there was only about 6 lights in the building and the roof was still thin and it was really not accessible at all. What we needed to do was completely transform the building into what it is now, and that is to build the creative centre downstairs, which is called the Roundhouse Studios, and this amazing performance space upstairs, with all the facilities that a contemporary audience needs. In fact, we wanted to transcend physical accessibility by miles. You know, it's got to become psychologically accessible, both in terms of how you feel about it, through its programme, through what it does, but also that you can see into it, and you don't have to have some degree in modern art to get into it. You know, it's a totally democratic feel to the space.
The reason I come to the Roundhouse is because I don't really have a studio set up at home. So I come here to get most of my compositions and stuff done. It's a really cool place to hang out with friends and people that you know.
It's very important for us at the Roundhouse, at me at executive level and the board level, that we work with people who knew what they're doing. So the architects obviously did. We had access consultants, David Bonnet Associates, and also we recruited an advisory board of people with lots of different abilities. We could then have those people's experiences and their expertise coming through the building and making it feel like it's a place for all people.
And so the people who took on this building with a vision of change then engaged in a process of how could this building engage with a wider audience, with a wider range of people. And so bit by bit, as a designer, one would start looking at the new obligations that this building is being exposed to and parading those and saying, can you reconcile all of them one with the other? And often the answer is no, and that's where, on the access side, my work begins. The architect has to understand the ambitions of the person who owns the building and what it is they expect, and then you expose this building to a whole range of demands because the public are going to use it, and there are many people who represent the interests of the public. And we're used to that. What architects are not used to is their propositions being tested, as it were, by users. Now, I think one of the extraordinary things about so-called access groups is, in the end, they're people who have particular requirements, but they are a testing mechanism at a very early stage for the architect to say, well, look, this is what we're planning here. What do you think? And if you can get a constructive dialogue going there, the architect benefits hugely from that exposure, because problems may emerge that would simply not have been thought about before. And so everybody should be thanked for actually speeding up the process of design rather than slowing it down. So instead of seeing it as a negative obstacle, it should be seen as a God-sent opportunity, quite honestly, to looking at how that design develops. And I think this is wholly new, and it's something to be welcomed. And for the moment, the subject is a bit devoted to disabled people, but it's broadening out to include older people, parents with children, and all the rest of it, as we know. And so the subject is growing up to be called inclusive design.
There's a spectrum of consultation. At one end of it you have what I would call cosmetic consultation, almost self-explanatory. And that cosmetic consultation, imagine a room full of random disabled people who aren't quite sure why they're there, and a bunch of rather well-dressed people in suits and things then comes into that room, makes a presentation to them, then says, do you like what we presented to you? Doesn't write down anything in what the disabled people then say, then walks away and leaves them. That is cosmetic consultation, box ticking. At the other end of the spectrum is what I would describe as empowered consultation. What you need is for the client to place an obligation on the architects and designers, not just to consult with the disabled consultation group, but to implement whatever is agreed between the architects and the disabled consultation group. And what then happens is that the input of that consultation group becomes useful. What you really need is disabled people with some experience of whatever the function of the building is and its operation, and that's going to save you an awful lot of time. Now also, if you can find disabled people who have had previous experience of being consultants, of being consulted, that's going to be to your advantage as well, because they're going to be able to understand perhaps drawings and, for instance, things like Part M regulations and the effect that will have on your design. It's well worth putting the time and the energy and the effort into identifying those people and recruiting them.
The role of the access consultants, it helps not only to be advocates and give voice to people who have been disappointed by the built environment in the past, but on the other hand, the access consultant has to be aware of the building and the person who's responsible, trying to hold together the finances for the project and contain costs. You need approvals for buildings as well, which means engaging with people who want to put signs up everywhere and fire officers and so on. And you have to have the wisdom of Solomon, quite honestly, in order to reconcile these various aspirations that may be in conflict with one another. And it's one of the delights of the job. But it's not simply that. You've also got the underpinning of all of that is having an almost forensic knowledge of the building itself, because knowledge is the fount of this. And so with the Roundhouse, for example, I pored over plans over a long period of time, understanding this building, its limitations and its opportunities. And you've got to be almost as good as the architect in knowing the building. And that's where I think your influence lies in the end.
There are in fact many features which are highly specialised, which the Roundhouse was advised on. I think the feature of which I'm proudest is that at one level in the circular building there is what I call colour-coded orientation guidance, so that once you had become accustomed to the building, you would know where you were by the colour that was nearest to you.
You must remember that the Roundhouse is a Grade 2 style listed building, so there are restrictions on the intervention that you can do to it. But on the other hand, it was important to make the building accessible for all. The starting point was really to try and extrapolate from the historic element of the building all the vertical connections and horizontal connections that would allow access to the space. In the main auditorium space, we have added a gallery level, but all the access to this is now in the new wing, and that has allowed for greater flexibility both in design and also in terms of reducing the impact on the building itself.
In the lower part of the building, where the foundations are, and we've got arches there, there was deep concern about them being changed, by which I mean being made wider, in order to, say, get wheelchair users through, or people who walk with sticks. And if one looks closely at the building plans, we notice that some corridors were sufficiently wide and others weren't. And so you identify those routes that are wider, and then enter negotiations with those who need to use the building. What do you think? We have a proposal. and those who don't want the building altered or want minimal change to it. And we're trying to match up the two, because if you can't, then you don't make progress. So it's not necessarily compromise, it's actually identifying ways forward that don't compromise the ambitions or aspirations of the building users, and similarly don't compromise the responsibilities of the conservationists to avoid change.
The idea of inclusive design is also the interface within the building. It's what the user will use. It's the lowered urinal that they will use. It's the signage they can navigate with. It's those kind of things that actually make a building accessible. You can make a building physically accessible by having level access, but it's how you interface with that building, because if you've got a white building with white walls and white floors, people aren't going to find their way around. And it's little details in the design that sort of make this building really work. For example, the handrails on the staircases, the way they contrast visually and with the wall and with the background colour. They turn down so people can't catch their clothing. They turn into the wall. You can see them, you can hold them, and they feel good. Within the accessible WCs, there's things like the paper towel dispenser, which is not normally supplied as a standard, as they call dock-end pack. The signage was, I think, a real triumph here. We went through stages where we had the Access user group come along, look at prototypes, and now what the signage we see in the building reflects the consultation with the user group.
Take the cafe at entrance level. One might ask, where's the evidence of so-called accessibility within that cafe? And actually it's all around us there, but it's not that evident because it's so obvious, much of it. It doesn't have any doors. There are large wide openings that don't restrict the movement of people. The tables and chairs, instead of being cluttered up near the bar where you want to get service and place an order, are kept well away from them. The location of the cafe is by the entrance. That's how you capture your cafe people and enable them to spend their money. So it's by the entrance, it's by the lift, it's by the loos. So it makes a tidy package as a designer and makes sense as a user, and it makes best business opportunity of the cafe because it's got to earn its keep as well. And also there we have a range of choices of tables in that cafe. There are some tables where you can get your knees under very easily with a central pillar. There are other tables that have a leg at each corner which are much more stable. And indeed there are some there with benches. So there's a range of choices, and I think a lot of what Access is about having choices available to you so you can use your own common sense to say I want to be here rather than there without not engaging at all.
Access to toilets is always something that takes up an awful lot of time of any disabled consultation group's consultation, because for wheelchair users it's a matter of space and accessibility in terms of getting onto and off a loo. For partially sighted people it's a matter of colour contrast. People with arthritic problems will find screw taps almost impossible to use. So you've actually got an awful lot of different requirements, but that's why you need a range of people with a range of impairments on your disabled consultation group. They can give you all that information.
We don't live on a flat earth, and the topography of Camden is not immediately evident until you go out of the door from this building and you see there's a hill. And this building actually sits on a hill, but the floors within it are level, so we have to reconcile those external levels with internal levels. And at the front that's achieved through steps. But there are alternatives to those steps for people who can't use them. There's a ramp there as well.
Actually, the entrance to a building, any building, is probably the most important part of it, because if I can't find my way in, what's the point of going there? At the Roundhouse, I can find the texture at the top of the steps. I can find a handrail that will guide me down the steps, and that will guide me eventually to an entrance where I hear a door open, and I know that as I go ahead, I walk straight ahead, I come to the box office, and there is a person there saying, "Yes, sir, would you like to buy a ticket?"
The Roundhouse is in the centre of Camden. It's in a residential area, and whilst it's bounded on one side from a railway line, all the rest of it is residential. So there was a limit to the disruption that a rock venue like this could have on the local residents. And so there was a need to upgrade the building to make sure that it could work as a year-round entertainment centre and also not disrupt the local community. The main technical upgrade on the building was the work done to the roof. On one hand, you have this structural web of steel, that bit like a lampshade, which was positioned over the existing roof on top of springs that are on the main brick walls. The springs allow the low frequency sound to be absorbed, whilst the structure itself holds up the gantries and lighting required for the performance space. In addition, the extra thickness allows for sound insulation. So 3 moves have actually made the old Victorian roof perform as good as the 6-foot thick brick walls. And this has allowed the Roundhouse to have rock concerts and a level of 120 decibel throughout the year, whilst previously they could only host 3 a year. If you're an architect, all these are not constraints, they should be challenges, and a good architect should use these and take them forward just like any other constraint that you might have, and bring the best of the design out of it. And we like solving problems. We like solving problems with something beautiful, so it can't be anything different. It is integrated. We are getting now better buildings because of this. Regulations obviously will change in the future, but if you compare it to the buildings that were created only even 20 years ago, we certainly have come a long way.
There's a sophistication about the accessibility here in that it's mainstream. There was a tendency, I think, in the past where when accessibility was a rather new thing, people wanted to proclaim it a little bit too loudly, and there were unnecessarily colours or evidence of certain features, really in a sense to demonstrate the fresh and innovative thinking of the client perhaps, or the designers. I think we're starting to move beyond that now, where in this building the access features are actually simply part of the mainstream. They're part of the fabric, they're very subtle, they don't need to be over-proclaimed, and in the main, most features to do with accessibility suit most users actually. So why make them special? And I think the way, the direction things is going in is to get away from the so-called special side of things and simply mainstream it. That is what most disabled people want, quite candidly. And I think particularly younger people, they don't want to be singled out. To come here is cool, they want to be cool.
One of the reasons why we've become one of the, I think, the 5th coolest brand in the country very quickly. We've only been open 2.5 years. Why has that happened? Well, it's because people feel they can be part of it. There's a great program that they feel they can be part of, the Roundhouse Studios program that young people feel they can be part of, but actually it's about when you come here you sort of go, oh my goodness, this is incredible. What it really means is that we try and strive, and we've got new plans all the time developing to enable more people to get more access to more brilliant activity at the Roundhouse.